And this course will receive AIA credits. So those of you who are a member of the AIA and would like this, please, you can access the spreadsheet that is now put into the chat, and the BSA will take care of sending it out to the AIA so you receive the credits. With this, I turn it to Naomi and JP from Colin Cottrell.
Thanks for coming, everybody. We're excited to join Kathleen on presenting the topic design for aging outdoors to you all this evening. So this is just us. You now see us. You can see how different we look from our promotional images to our actual faces on Zoom. We'll just jump right in. As speaking to architects, it's always kind of fun because you all have the same, understanding of the basic design principles of requirements of accessibility and the Americans with Disabilities Act, which obviously is a very important thing for not only seniors, but for everyone. And it's is equally important in the landscape as it is on your building projects. I think that while we understand and make sure that in any project that we have and meet or exceed basic design principles, we realize that these things are quite static. The regulations really around access and equity focus on the ability to get around or to literally have a seat at the table. But they don't go really beyond that, and especially in the landscape, because they are such static elements. So what we really want to talk to you tonight about is really thinking about the way in which landscapes as projects on their own, but also maybe more specifically as part of your building projects, how the value add is really, above and beyond this idea of the static, that it is about finding and celebrating the dynamics of the phenomenon of landscape. And so, we really want to think about embracing ideas of seasonality, about giving the opportunity for real connection to a landscape that it really is a touchstone for the passing of time. It is the opportunity to have a dynamic relationship with seasonality, the passing of a day, a week, a year, which is important for all of us, but especially important for the mental, physical, and emotional health of seniors. It is as we get older and older and our mobility gets limited, the ability to really be able to have a real connection with the earth and the phenomena of the natural world is critical. So, a lot of what we're going to talk about is ways to get people outdoors and some of the techniques in and around safety and best practices. But really, it is all rooted in this idea of the importance of experiential and this relationship with the dynamics of the world. So one of the first things that we're going to talk about is landscapes at scale. And again, this goes back to thinking about how landscapes can be incorporated into your building projects. So, there's the undeniable undeniable connection between your buildings and landscapes. And they can be at several scales. So what we think the best projects are ones that have a very intentional relationship between landscape at a small, medium, and large scale if there's the opportunity. So this is we're going to just talk about these topics, and JP and Kathleen, I do encourage you to add and jump in when we're talking about these things. during my part, you're welcome to jump in. This is a case study of a project that is a senior housing facility that we did a master plan for, to really start to look at. It was the landscape master plan to start to look at where there were opportunities to provide more interaction, again, with the landscape at several scales. So, every building has an entrance. How can that work for us as far as providing for a really easy and small scale intervention that can provide, again, seasonality, can provide texture, can provide the ability for gathering. And so in this case, we really looked at making sure that every entrance, while providing for better accessibility and code compliance, but also that it had intention, that it was intentionally thought about where someone might casually meet their neighbor, how the selection of plants were good for maintenance, as well as for, again, seasonality, texture, color. Maybe it's a step back, but I think one thing that we sometimes lose sight of is that the first scale, or the smallest scale of intervention, is really your room with a view. And again, in this project, we found that there was, to look back at practices that happened, say 15, 20 years ago, foundation plantings at the base of the building, as we're seeing on the left with our existing condition. There was this, there was this habit of planting things very close to the building, and in this case, completely blocking, after 15 years, the views out of your view. So one of the things that we worked with this community on was taking the vegetation at the building actually down and starting to push it away. And this is something we do for residential projects, even single family residential projects, where they might have foundation plantings at the house. If you are a person who has lost mobility in a way, or are, say, in a unit within a building like this that might actually limit your ability to get outside or even use communal spaces, wanting to be able to offer a prospect or a view out of a room. And so we looked at taking the things that were at the base of the building that either are overlooked or are blocking views, and start to create, even in these small spaces, the ability to look out. So thinking about that even as a very small scale intervention. We think a lot about group gatherings and smaller group gatherings, as well as larger group gatherings. And a lot of times these are places that can be carved out of spaces that already exist. In this example, there was a convergence of several paths and several landings at the building. And it made a lot of sense to just expand it to become an area where there was spill out. This was actually a communal space. It's a library. So working with this community to make an intentional outside space that relates to that common space. So again, that there's these casual as well as potentially program spaces that can be a place for more interaction with the landscape slightly outside the door. And then lastly, in the scales, the larger scale, again, in this example, it's a series of larger buildings. There were some courtyards, there are places near the buildings that we could have these interactions. We're really trying to think about how we could get even further out. And so a lot of times this manifests itself into walking paths or loops. In this example, we worked with the client to find areas to carve out crosswalks, to promote and to establish sidewalks in and around the vehicular traffic, as well as to find spurs that we could start to, say, connect to recreational resources or trail networks, other things. So trying to find those kind of opportunities, and along the way, making sure that all of those paths and other things are ADA compliant. one of the more unique things that we've done on several projects is that, buildings this large, a lot of times have fire lanes that can take a very sort of back of house feel. We have started to, in several projects, take the idea of the fire lane that sometimes is just an asphalt path, and start to really find the ability to make that path into a place. So finding opportunities for stopping, for adding in furnishings, adding in intentional plantings, while maintaining the openness of the fire lane, but that it becomes part of the walking loops or loops within a property. So again, this is a different example, having a very straightforward fire lane and really starting to take it and use it as an amenity. JP is going to talk a little bit about program elements. I mean, I think that part of what we like to think about is long gone are the days where, seniors are supposed to be diminutive and, sitting and watching the world go by. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the landscape programs.
The idea with this is that there are certainly programmatic elements that are popular among seniors. But I think the main idea is to think about combining and layering these programmatic elements to spark interaction and promote curiosity and exploration. So some of these are active and some of these are passive. But the main idea is that we don't want to get hung up on the actual program itself, but how these are organized. If we go to the next. So this is another case study for a new senior housing project, where the programmatic elements are organized around a central lawn or communal gathering area. And then you have individual programmatic uses, more active on one further away from the building and more passive closer to the building. But the central green is the hub that promotes this kind of layering and interaction that wouldn't happen ordinarily if these were just thought of individually and not cohesively. Another case study is a Boston Housing Authority's project where an existing Boston Housing Authority project where there was a courtyard that was fenced off and enclosed from its neighbors. So it was very much self-contained. And we were brought on to re-envision this space so that we could promote the neighborhood coming in and interacting with not only the seniors, but with each other, with the neighborhood. So a lot of this project was mostly about reinterpreting a seating element, in other words, so that it could become both functional, for seating and for elderlies and for the neighbors, but also a play element by adding color and adding undulation. It actually serves dual purposes. So we thought that was interesting. That's thinking of multiple uses and of a single element. I think that is something that is can be rewarding for a project. And then this is another case study of another new housing project where functionally this building met the land 14 or 15 feet higher than the ring road and parking area that is adjacent to it. And functionally, we need to make a connection. But rather than just thinking about this functionally, there is an opportunity to actually make this a space, something an inviting and interesting space to walk through and explore on its own. So it's thinking of something just beyond its function. And we did that by, go to the next page. So functionally, we need a way to get down because we have to negotiate topography, but along the way, we create smaller and larger, different scales of gatherings, and also planting. We add an element of seasonal planting to provide texture and interaction with that kind of a native and natural material. Go to the next page. And we do that by adding a variety of different plant materials to provide seasonal interest. And this is a way of just right outside the building, you can quickly explore and interact with nature. And it's something that is, we feel welcome and supplements your indoor experience by creating a multi-layered and textured outdoor experience.
I think that to add in with the idea of sensory gardens, they don't have to be as robust as, say, this scheme where we have several layers, there's lots of plants. The introduction of plant material that has scent is something that's actually great for everyone. But really with folks that are having trouble with memory, scent is a really great experience and can bring you back to all kinds of places in your mind. And so the palette that we're showing here are a lot of the native New England plants that have a very strong sense of, have an odor. And so these are the kind of things that, given the opportunity, even at, say, a building entry or at a terrace where you might eat, it's great to incorporate these. It may not be a riot of color or a riot of seasonality because of spatial constraints, but in a project like this and in this specific garden, we were able to design it with all of these different, with this palette and to be able to choreograph different scents and smells throughout the seasons.
With that, we'll turn it over to Kathleen.
Yeah, Kathleen.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, JP. And I think what my co-presenters here set up is really starting to talk about touching on the fact that as you may grow old, our family and friends and the people we design for move into and age over time, that they want to stay active, that their environment around them is really important for stimulation and keeping your mind active. Socialization is really important. And what JP and Naomi presented really starts to get at all of those things that really enrich a life even into the older years. I'm going to pivot a little bit now from that to talking about dementia-friendly outdoor spaces. And so this is getting more specific than just talking about the aging public, but getting into people who have memory loss. I'm starting here with a slide that says dignity equals meeting me where I am. And that's really important for people who have dementia or Alzheimer's. They're going in a different place. They will be in a different place than most other users will be. And it's important in our designs to meet them where they are. And in doing so, it gives them the opportunity to really have dignity in their later years and to really feel comfortable in their own space, which becomes more and more difficult over time. My profile that was shared with you at the beginning is so interesting to listen to and might make you all pause a bit as to what brings me here. My background is almost entirely in the public realm. I love it there, and I have managed my way into working for Tool Design, which some of you may know is really about transportation. And but we really focus on equity, empathy, and really designing with every user in mind. And my background, however, has this moment in the many years of having designed spaces, courtyards, and other spaces for the aging. And that plus my own personal experience, which is on the screen before you, my lovely mother, who passed away in July of 21, having had Alzheimer's for about 10 years. And those combined experiences of both designing and living in those spaces brings me here today to share with you what I understand and know and use in all of my designs relative to really providing for the aging that have dementia and or Alzheimer's. So really quickly, next slide, please, JP. Really quickly, dementia, if y'all different words get put out there, but dementia is really about um, a condition. So it's a progressive decline and loss of cognitive functioning and then behavioral abilities. Alzheimer's is a very specific brain disorder that slowly destroys your memory and thinking skills and eventually the ability to carry out your basic tasks of each day. Alzheimer's is the disease that most commonly causes dementia, which is why often the two are spoken about in the same phrases and contexts. And the graphic here is just really touching on the fact that as designers, the outdoor spaces and the buildings that we design are one of the most important places where we can really make sure there's accessibility and equity in serving our the aging public. JP, next slide, please. So some very specific things now. So JP and Naomi really started touching on these, big picture ideas that are really important for all these spaces. And then specifically for people with dementia, safety is number one. Some of the things that happen as a person moves through these stages is memory loss, poor judgment, confusion. They tend to wander and get lost in familiar places. It will take longer for them to complete daily tasks. They also have a loss of balance and problems with their actual movement and start to have deteriorating visual abilities. So it's very, very important that the spaces we design are safe. So relative to an outdoor space, such as a courtyard, for those with dementia, it should be an enclosed space, which means fencing. There should absolutely be smooth walking surfaces. As Naomi pointed out, we'll all meet the basic ADA guidelines, but the texture of the walking surface, particularly for those with dementia, is very important. Intermittent handrails or other elements that are about waist high is really important so that those who need extra balance have something to grab onto. The shelter at having shelter at building thresholds is very important because as people with dementia move from the light of the outdoors to the light of the indoors, their eyes need to adjust and sometimes that takes longer. So having a shelter over those thresholds before they enter the building is really an important factor to try to incorporate. Any features that you have throughout an outdoor space really need to be sturdy and secure. And as I say these are things you probably all do inside your buildings as well. So these aren't surprising things to need to incorporate. As was just discussed, all the wonderful plants that can be incorporated into a garden. Specifically in these locations, it's important to make sure they're not toxic. There are no thorns, there are no berries, things of that nature. People with dementia and Alzheimer's start to forget what those are specifically and may tend to eat them. So there are things that have to be considered. And having an abundance of shade is really important. It's harder for, as the aging community has dementia or Alzheimer's, it's harder for them to control their their body temperatures. Next slide, please. Orientation is very important. As I mentioned, these people with dementia will tend to wander, and they have a tendency to lose balance. So really being very clear in circulation and orientation is really important. So touching back on the overhead on screening at doorways, having that be a visually significant feature in a courtyard can be very helpful at the entrance exit to the outdoor space, because a person can view it from afar, know where they're heading. As was also touched on, being able to view these spaces from inside is not only something that helps in the healing powers from the inside as prospect, but it also will help someone with dementia understand that they would like to go outside, and it's an invitation to make that change. Circulation should always be continuous and have a solid surface. A simple loop path is the best, as opposed to the wonderful walking paths that Naomi was describing. Is wonderful, you know, as you're aging and getting that exercise. And when you have dementia, you need to pull it in a bit and have something very clearly defined and limited. The edge of the walkway really should either incorporate a contrasting color, or it should be a contrasting color or tone to the adjacent landscape. And this is really important for people to understand where the edge is, and always wide enough for at least 2 people to be able to move along the pathway comfortably. Next slide, please. We've touched on accessibility. This is, you know, some other specifics. These spaces should be one level without any tripping hazards, and the design should be as clutter-free as possible. Seating should have armrests and intermittently placed handrails or waist-height surfaces, touching on that again. All surfaces should be easy to reach, and there should be seating at regular intervals so that users of the space can rest at regular intervals. Next slide, please. Socialization is really important, even as the aging may have dementia or Alzheimer's, and they might be losing other abilities. It's really important to provide these opportunities to have a range of seating style and interactive features, such as the gardening or just the plants in general. The multi-generational elements are really important, to be able to have children there and be comfortable with children in the space and have things that they're interested is an additional interest to the elderly there as well. Including quiet spaces for refuge is very important. Not everyone, as they age in this way, can are as comfortable with extra stimuli. So having some spaces that are set aside is very important. Also, having seating that looks like seating and feels like home is very important. As another really great example, Naomi and JP were showing this great expression of seating that is also play and art and color, which is wonderful and engaging for older people. When it comes to those with dementia, they will feel most comfortable and drawn to seating that feels like furniture. And so that's a little different here. And to always make sure that there's room for companion seating, meaning a wheelchair can pull up in the same space and really interact with the other seating at the same level and in the same way. Next slide, please. And the last thing that I would touch on here is reminiscence. Those people with dementia and Alzheimer's, reminiscence is one of the most important things because near-term memory, I apologize, my dog has decided to join me in the presentation. Come here. I apologize if you can hear him. I'm not sure how much he's being picked up. So near-term memory is what you hold on to most, excuse me, that you don't hold on to, and from long ago is what you remember. And so even down to having designs that are sort of retro design to the community that you're serving is a really great approach to design overall. Programming the space, I love the images that was shown about the bocce courts and barbecuing and really being interactive. At this stage, home-like activities are more important. Are there mailboxes and vignettes with a telephone or brooms or watering can? These are the types of things that they'll really relate to in these spaces. Sensory elements are very important, along with, varied plant textures, colors, and smells. Are there fountains for sound? Music, I can't tell you enough. My mother responded to music every time. Bird baths, to be able to see nature really come to you. And then whatever these various elements and plants, it's important to incorporate and think about the various heights they should be at, whether sitting or standing, the way someone is able to look and tilt their head is really important. So having variation in those elements is also important. So thank you very much for letting me share my insight on this.
Great. Thank you both very much for this very well thought presentation. And also I appreciate the back and forth and making a distinction between what is for the older population and what has to be specifically for people with dementia. We're open for discussions and questions, but I would like to start. I have a question for Naomi, and I have a question also for Kathleen. For Naomi, linking it back to our previous session here at this committee about the need to integrate the older adult in the broader community, whether thinking about age-friendly design or dementia-friendly design, as you do work for different populations, right? But also places that equally would welcome the older adults and the younger kids. In your experience, how successful are you to make the case for the older adults on non-senior focused landscapes, to make the case for a client, let's say, that they should maybe start thinking about some element a little differently to make sure that the older adult is integrated in a playground or is integrated in a park?
So parks, I'll take this question. Parks and playgrounds in particular are a place that we always advocate for. And I wouldn't say that we necessarily come out and say designing for seniors or for the, for the aging. But what we always advocate for is to say that kids are usually brought to a park by some kind of adult. They usually aren't, in the way in which the world works today, or the world here works today, they usually aren't free-range children that are going to a park by themselves. There's some kind of adult that goes with them. And so what we usually what we advocate for, and successfully, is to say, okay, the play elements need to be fun and they need to be vibrant and interactive, but there also then needs to be the opposite of that. There needs to be, again, as Kathleen is saying, there needs to be an opportunity to be sitting in the shade if the activity is in the sun. There needs to be a place that can be a little bit quieter and off to the side if it's a very loud activity. And it really is about providing for opportunities for, it's really the idea of universal design, which isn't just that everybody can get to the play equipment, but that there's something for everybody. So while at a public park, we may have a big, say, family-sized table where we gang a whole bunch of picnic tables together and call it, a communal space. We want to then make sure that we always have at least one opportunity for sitting somewhere else privately. And so it really is about providing for diversity of experience in the design itself. And when we're usually pretty successful in getting that done, because most of the people that are paying for the playgrounds or for the public parks either is an adult or knows an adult that has to bring their kid to a poorly designed park. And we see that the spaces that are actually poorly designed for parents, like playgrounds that are poorly designed for parents, have a lot less kids there because the parents don't want to go there either. So that's usually the argument that we make. And it is successful because, there's really like a litmus test that you can point to that makes the whole project successful if they're a place for adults as well as kids. I don't know, does that
Thank you.
answer your question, Philippe?
Yes, absolutely. But it takes designers to be mindful of that. And I think you guys are mindful of that. You work in the senior space and you will integrate the older adults in that space. My next question Kathleen, you're very welcome to add a little bit if you want to add to what Naomi has said. But I want to personally note a little bit the notion of the retro design feature that you've noted in the last slide. My comment is retro doesn't need to be traditional looking, right?
Oh, not
Retro,
everyone was, yeah.
exactly, right? Retro is a familiar object to a certain person when they were more aware of their environment, right? If people grew up in the mid-century period and they're accustomed to this type of design, then a modern looking chairs, very simple design could be a familiar element to them. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. And, I think it's a rule of thumb, the landscapes that we design sort of have this 20-year shelf life, right? And then things need to be, touched up and upgraded. And I think it works in tandem when you're designing for the aging that you can start to respond to the next generation of those that need this extra sensibility to design, to try to reach them where they are for the next group of aging population. And yeah, they grew up in the 80s. That will be a very fun landscape.
Yes, yes. Anyone else? Questions, comments? I should not be the moderator. You guys can ask the question directly.
Before, if people want to queue up for questions, I will say that specifying plant material and thinking about retro plant material is actually really interesting, because we now have on a lot of the work that's in the public realm a mandate to do all native plant material. And so when you start to get into the list of the things that Kathleen is talking about, where there's no fruit and there's no thorns and and especially if you try to go to things that are retro, the plants that were planted by, say, a homeowner back in the 1950s and 60s are not going to be on your native plant list. So, there is this, almost all of our projects require a certain amount of sensitivity to the native plant environments, and for all kinds of reasons, sustainability, doing the right thing as far as that's concerned. There are times where we do try to advocate for, say, you know, a plant that is not on the native plant list, and we'll try to do it in a pot or something like that. So we can incorporate, say, a plant that was very popular, again, in the 60s or the 70s, that would not be meeting your Conservation Commission standard for all natives. So that is one place where retro is really hard.
Yeah. I think you touch on a really, it's a really important issue I find over and over these days. And the only strategy that I have regularly successfully incorporated is the idea that as you're moving out towards the, away from the built environment and towards a natural environment, that you really make sure you're using natives, and that the closer to built environment or previously disturbed environment, that perhaps that's opportunity to maybe use some of the more non-native plants. I mean, look at the hydrangea, right? We have one or two that are really great, and then most of them that everyone sees in the pictures are not, you know, the native hydrangea. So there's a lot of plants that fall into that category. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
More questions, comments?
And I think I'll just, and let maybe people will come up with some questions, but you know, paving is hard. Paving's really hard. To, you know, a lot of times we are restricting ourselves to a poured, you know, whether it's concrete, asphalt, because of, again, not, especially in New England, that in using pavers, you can have differential settlement or frost heaves or things like that. Very different from, say, when you have a slab on the interior of a building. And so paving is a hard one, because you want there to be interest and texture, and for it to be completely monotonous. And I mean, again, to go to sustainability, and have, say, concrete that is highly reflective, those are things that are really hard on seniors. So,
Or permeable even.
true,
Yeah.
permeable is really hard.
Yeah.
So I think that it's not aesthetically aesthetically our challenge to design well for, you know, universally, is less of an aesthetic challenge. And there's more conflict when you start to get into, say, LEED and design for the aging, on the exterior. Because while having a concrete that has high reflectivity, that's not good for seniors that maybe have sensitive eyes, especially if you want to promote activity in the summer. You know, you know, so again, like permeable paving is really hard. So we find that that's one of the biggest challenges, as far as paving is concerned, that, you know, it's just that there's lots of things to consider there.
It is a challenge. I would definitely echo you, Naomi. Particularly, you know, I design a lot of streetscapes, and these spaces that we're designing should reflect those who are going to use it. So when we, you know, skim it down to the most accessible pavement of concrete, let's say, where is the cultural expression? You know, accessibility is not just being able to maneuver physically, I also, as with accommodating those who are aging, it's also needs to feel accessible and welcoming to whoever the user group is, right? So we're talking about those who are aging, but you know, plain white concrete does not reflect every community, and it's a challenge.
So Philippe, there is a question, which
Yeah.
is a great one. So this question says, you mentioned a range of scales is important for the success of a project. Do small scale moments have more impact than bigger ones? Or does the best mixture depend on the building use? Let me think about this for a minute. I love to use the phrase, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Because I think that lots of small scale interventions can add up to be something really incredible if they're done well. You know, a lot of places, especially in New England, where we don't have a lot of land, and where things, especially if you're working in the urban environment, you don't have the opportunity for big moments. It is really important to take the opportunity to be thoughtful in those small moments that you have. So again, to think about when we were talking about even just building entrances, and a lot of the things that Kathleen was talking about, you know, there's really simple small moves that you can do that will affect every person who comes in and out of a building on a daily basis. So potentially that is a more important thing than, say, a very large scale intervention that's maybe further away from the building that's harder to get to. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Kathleen. I don't know if you can see that question on the chat, or if you want to add anything, or JP.
I think you're nailing it. Yeah, I think you're nailing it. I think in terms of each individual. So if a small intervention affects one life being more comfortable as they're aging, that's significant.
Well, and in some way, being outside is a connection to something greater than your experience in the interior. So automatically by default, I think you are experiencing the weather, you know, the sunlight, the daylight. You are already kind of touching things that are greater than yourself. So in some ways, being outside is a huge scale change.
And then the second part to that question is, does the mixture of scales depend, the best mixture of scales depend on the building use? I mean, a lot of what we were showing was larger buildings that are specifically and intentionally for seniors. And so when you have a group of seniors, I think it is really important to try to have a diversity. Again, diversity is key. I think that might be a landscape architect's answer to almost everything that you ever ask them, that diversity is key. We're maximalists, we're not minimalists, even though we might want things to look minimal in their aesthetic. The diversity and the overlapping sort of systems that you can provide is really important. So I think it's really important, if you have a captive audience of seniors, to provide opportunities for that single person to be really comfortable, and then some where you can have them interact with groups, and then some that allow for those groups then to add their families. Again, a lot of that depends on the kind of space that you have. And again, diversity is key. So diversity in the plants, diversity in the kind of spaces that you offer, diversity in the fact that we really want to celebrate the change of the seasons and the diversity of weather and other things.
The thing, just to add a little bit to that, the thing that we like about designing landscapes is that it's never a cookie cutter approach. It's that it always you're always rethinking about what is a landscape and what is a landscape for this particular project, because it depends where you are. So it's always by default dynamic and it's changing constantly. And so that's something that we like to bring to every project, is something that's unique, the flavor of where you are.
Before we go, we have a question from Mary McCarthy. But before we go to this question, I would like to add to this is to that specific question, small scale or large scale. Sometimes large scale intervention are not possible, right? For cost reasons, for example. And we choose to do maybe few small scale interventions. And I think something Ruth and I had talked about previously when we were talking about age and dementia friendly spaces is that it's not all or nothing. Right? If we can do, I think Kathleen said that, if you can touch the life of 1 or 2 people through one small scale intervention, we're already bettering the environment for those people. When we design for memory care is different because it has its principles, and we know everyone in this community has dementia, Alzheimer's, has cognitive impairment, and it has to be a safe environment, and it has to be a self-guided environment where they can be outside, maybe on their own. But when we're designing age and dementia friendly environment, few interventions could really raise the bar of that outdoor space, and doesn't need to be all or nothing. Mary, go ahead. You want to ask your question?
Sure, thank you for this talk. Naomi's building on what you were saying earlier about how some urban projects are limited in outdoor space, especially where you can't control the adjacent spaces that are public, but you can control maybe your terraces and other outdoor spaces. Can you speak a little bit to those outdoor spaces that aren't like at grade? What kind of design approaches do you like to take for those that are particularly good for designing for aging?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that we found, and just full disclosure, we do a lot of work with Philippe at Demilla Schaefer. And one of the things that we really like about terrace design that we typically do with them is having cover. I mean, a lot of times you're going to have a terrace that's underneath another terrace, and so there is the opportunity to say open your doors, even if it's say raining. You can open your doors or step out and not get rained on. I think that understanding view, again, it may be something that you can't control, but when we can control it, again, the idea of prospect or having something that you have, say, in the foreground, the middle ground, or in the distance, that are things that are composed, are really important. Again, a lot of this is that we can't control it, but what are you viewing to? What is it that you're viewing to? But more than anything, to be able to open your door and get the air. And if we can, a lot of times we do like to have, a view to something that's going on, right? Whether if your terrace can be overlooking, say, the entrance, or you have a view obliquely to another unit, or it's just to be able to engage with life that's not inside your four walls. Whether that life is plant material or, the atmosphere, or say people coming and going on the street. I mean, a lot of times it's stuff that we can't control. Things like planters and other things are so individual. We like to have the ability to have seating and, so to be large enough to have seating and potentially some planting and some individual expression, so that it's not so small that you can't do that. But a lot of times that's say out of our control. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Just to piggyback on that, sometimes when we're dealing with urban or suburban environments, so oftentimes what don't you want to see? It's also managing and controlling what is the best view. And if you do need to hide something, you don't do it as a wall, or you try to do something that's visually interesting in and of itself. So Sure, there's a lot of things to look at, and a lot of it is site specific. So it's not like a blanket answer that unfortunately applies to everything.
A plug on that is that this is where integration of landscape and architecture is extremely important. On some projects we've worked with Naomi and her team is during schematic design or even concept or master plan, they would recommend, what if the community space moves to that side, because this is how the outdoors could be better on that side of the building. What if the terrace on the second floor is south facing and not north facing, or vice versa, because of some shading? And just advocating for you guys a little bit, and Kathleen, is that your insight in the early phase of the project is very important to the success of the project. It's not about just adding plants really when we're ready to think about the outside.
Definitely.
We have two questions in the chat. I think the first one from Ariane Walsh is asking about any more ways or references to learn websites and books. I will leave it up to you guys to add this to the chat if you have any recommendation you can think of.
Lots and lots
Okay.
and lots of references. And I don't know,
Or
it's an interesting question, Philippe, if there's sort of a resource place that you're holding through BSA for references or documents to reference.
we don't
because,
I don't think we have, Ruth, I don't think we have anything out there online that is, it can be, but what we've done previously is, Kathleen, you're very welcome, and Naomi and JP, to share your email in the chat for people to get in touch with you. Or if you want to send us, me and Ruth, the list of references, and then we can send it to the BSA, and the BSA will send it to the attendees. We don't have individual people
Or
emails.
we'll post it on the DFA website.
Or we could do that as well.
Connected to this meeting,
That's
like follow up to
that's
the meeting. That's
excellent.
probably the same place where you can find the recording.
Great. Yes, thank you. We have a question by Nicholas Lance Bradley. Do you want me to read the question, or you want to say it out loud yourself? I can read it.
I can say it.
Okay, go ahead.
So in regards to diversity and accessibility, with Philippe, you kind of already answered that first part. And so did you, Kathleen. How do you gather what is best for the community when it comes to working for most in regards to design? And
you
then
have to ask them.
right.
You really have to
Encourage and-
engage with the people that you are serving in your design. I'm a real advocate for being a humble designer, not being there to just express my own artistic direction, which in some cases is exactly what we should be doing as designers. In my particular slant on things and working in the public realm, I listen to the community, I talk to the community, and really try to understand what's they value. You need to see the community and the context of a site and really understand how it's developing and how the community expresses themselves in other locations. It's all, yeah, you've got to listen. More ears than mouth.
I think that that's maybe something that is pretty typical of a landscape architect's experience. Being an architect first and then becoming a landscape architect at first, it was incredibly frustrating to realize that there are so many people who own public space. And you're like, what? Why can't I just do this design that I have in my head? And then over working in the public realm in landscape for over a decade, it's made me really love the community engagement that we do. And a lot of times when we're working for an established, say, senior living community or any kind of community, whether it's a school or another kind of, say, intentional community, we always do listening events beforehand, because landscapes are important to people, and they have people have real strong feelings about landscapes, but a lot of people don't have the tools to be able to tell you how that takes physical form. So in some ways, it's very different than architecture in that way. Everybody kind of understands how a bedroom and a bathroom and a hallway work. And they can describe that and talk about it, but people don't really understand a lot of times why landscapes have felt significant to them. And so that's really, I don't say that I am an expert at making things look a certain way. I think that what we're experts at is listening to, gathering information about how a community wants their space to be, and then making it have physical form. So we don't ever really say like, could cookie cutter put our, look or stamp on something. It really does. It's a grassroots effort in all of our public work. And it is something that has really informed our work on other kinds of communities. So even if they're private, say development that's for, that's assisted living or continuum of life care, we do engage the people who work there and live there, and then the families of those folks to really understand how people want to see the space used. And I have never worked with an environmental gerontologist, but I would love to.
Okay.
And I want to figure out how to write that into my next proposal,
Mhm.
because I think that would be fantastic. A lot of times as landscape architects, we are getting the, you all know, you work with landscape architects. So we're getting a small percentage of the small percentage of your fee. And so if it can be written into a larger proposal, we would love to do it. But a lot of times we're kind of a small potato in a big stew. So
Okay.
Kathleen, if you have other things to add to that.
Well, another kind of angle, if in your question you said, how do you figure out things that work for most? And it's my experience, and I invite everybody else to share, is it's stopped being surprising how the same features are wonderful for kids, for youngsters, for old people, for mothers with kids, for fathers with kids, for the features that are good for people with dementia are good for all old people, and what's good for old people is good for everybody if it's good design. So it's not like we're kind of have boxes of features that are okay for different parts of the using public. If it's a space that has very clear navigation, and you know where you're going and where you're coming, it's comforting for everybody.
Okay. Thank you. That's interesting. I'm in grad school to be an environmental gerontologist. So your last point is what we really focus on. So thank you all.
But the one thing that I would add just to that topic, or that general topic, is that sometimes the community process sometimes conflicts. And so people want different things that sometimes can't work together. And sometimes it's the designer's responsibility to reinterpret that or reframe that conflict into an opportunity, I think. And so that is where we come in, and hopefully we can reach a compromise, but it's part of the discussion that or conflict management that we are brought in to resolve also.
True.
Thank you.
A great segue into the next question in the chat from Ida Veloria. Ida, I think you don't have a photo. Maybe I should read your question. It's about explaining a little bit more how to design dementia-friendly outdoor spaces. And Ruth, that's probably you and I a little bit, but I pulled out the report. Ruth and I were involved in creating a guide.
Yep.
creating a guide for age and dementia-friendly design as requested by a task force formed by the state. And there are 5 principles at the end of this report that are applicable for inside and outside. And I will name those, and then I'm hoping those interested could access the report online because it is there. The features are contrast, lighting, memory aids, which are features where people could remember where they are, so recognizable points in space, safety, and outdoor access, which is the outdoors. But you could access the report and dig deeper into this, and each one of those would be applicable to inside and outside. I don't want to read the report out to everybody, but this report is available online and could be accessed very easily. Ruth, do you want to add anything? Kathleen, Naomi?
Trying to think if there's if we can pull out a link, but and put it in the chat. But I'm not prepared for that. But again, we can always leave good stuff in together with the recording.
We'll do that. We'll add the report to the list of references that
That's right.
our speakers will send to us, so that everyone has it out available. More great conversations.
And as far as the future, we're still looking for thoughts and ideas on what to do next. For some reason, there is something that is in my mind that was probably a joint meeting with the Access Committee. Does that ring a bell, Josh? Maybe not. We'll have to look for, because something in my brain looked at a few months into the 2023 season. So, but anybody here on this team, the environmental gerontologist, how about joining forces with a couple of your colleagues and come up with a presentation for us, so that the next time somebody asks an architect, have you worked with an environmental gerontologist? The answer would be yes. So please get in touch with us. And I think I have communicated with one of your colleagues in school and invited her to join. I can't remember. That was a few months back. So she gave me the whole interview questionnaire. And one of the questions were, do you know what environmental gerontology is? So think about it. We will be thrilled to hear. So.
Okay. Naomi, Kathleen, do you want to address the question by Eric Reinhardt about pollinators, how they come to plants, and any recommendations? It's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. Kathleen.
Okay, so specifically to age-friendly outdoor spaces, pollinator gardens, I think, could be an issue because of the insects you're attracting. Having said that, I think you may, depending on your plans, you're attracting insects anyway. And if we're doing our job right, we should be attracting insects. So I think it's probably more a matter of how the planting is incorporated into the design. And I would say that if there's a desire to attract butterflies, for example, or support bees, that it's a design challenge of figuring out how it can happen in the space. How's that for an answer?
I think I punted that to you first because we have had a lot of interest over the last, say, 5 years. This has become a big topic for us, and we all understand the importance of pollinators. It can get a little tricky in, say, a place where you are going to have a dining table, or if you are going to have benches, certainly playgrounds there. It's hard because you can't control say how someone's going to react to a bug flying near them as much as you can control the bug flying near them. And so, there's an instinct in some people to get very concerned and uptight, and you want to obviously mitigate that. We once had a community that we were designing a public park and really want to have beehives and hire a beekeeper in order for there to be pollinators. And it came down to liability, that the public agency was not going to take on the liability of having encouraged a swarm of bees, a hive of bees, because ultimately there are people who are deathly allergic to them. So it's an interesting thing. Again, there in some ways our interest in doing the right thing environmentally and making sure that spaces are really safe for people can sometimes be at odds.
And my understanding of pollinators or pollinating plants is that you can't control necessarily what type of insect will go to it. If it attracts a butterfly and that is the desired insect, you have no way of controlling. You don't. Well, I don't want bees. You can't make that distinction, and the insect is not going to care.
Can I ask you guys a question about that just came up to my mind? We're designing more and more, or at least we're looking at native landscapes. We talked about the challenge of this, but also landscapes that don't need irrigation, right, for water conservation. And we often think of outdoor spaces, maybe for older adults, that are more controlled from a aesthetics, maybe from a plant growth, maybe a lawn, which is so much water consuming, and we, for sustainability and the ecology, we want to stay away from those elements that are extra, needing extra water. Where does, in your experience, the balance lie? And is it okay to do a natural meadow space for seniors that could thrive without water? And how to balance this, right? The need to have a control outdoor space, but at the same time reduce the water usage. Sorry if I throw a curveball or a unprepared, but it's something that we need to think about.
No, I look at JP because of the how many acre meadow in New Hampshire that is going to be installed. I mean, I think that again, it kind of goes back to the idea of landscapes at different scales, or landscapes maybe at different distances away from, say, a controlled environment, a built space. And while I think it's wonderful to allow for and promote walking trails and connection, that again are designed so that they're safe to walk on and marked clearly, have a choreography that's appropriate for the users. I think it's great to have lawns that have meadows. The important thing is that there also then be a very clearly area that gives you, say, a mown lawn in relationship to it, so that you have the ability to have the programs and to have the controlled environment within a larger landscape that is performing better for you environmentally. I don't think that we would ever, for an active community of any kind, ever have, it basically be a jungle and you're confined just to being on, say, a path, or that the only place you can occupy is a bench that's next to that path. There have to be opportunities for use. And so a lot of times that means that you're going to have a lawn. Now, figuring out the size that needs is really our job, right? What size is it? Or we've done this in some public landscapes. In particular, JP and I worked for many years with DCR up at Halibut Point in Rockport, Massachusetts, where we converted a very large lawn into a mown area. But the idea is that there are some paths and places that are carved out of that are mown every week or every 2 weeks, depending on the growing season. And then they have the opportunity to be able to mow it for events. It's not so precious that you couldn't do that. So trying to have things be, again, flexible. Someone in the chat at a certain point talked about flexibility. So that's a long-winded answer. Kathleen?
Yeah, I think you've covered it.
Excellent. So if we don't have any more questions, I think it's 6:41. We usually end at 6:45. I just want to remind everybody that this is an architect. There is learning credits for architecture. Those who joined late, I'm going to repost this link. Please log in and put your credentials, which I will do. And please join us for our next meeting, and please please contribute for ideas how we can bring your voice or a voice of somebody that you know in a topic that you think is important for designing for the aging population to this committee. Thank you for attending, and the recording will be online in maybe a couple of days. It'll take some time for the BSA to adjust it and upload it. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much, Naomi, JP, and Kathleen, for this very engaging and much needed conversation. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you very much.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Pleasure.
Good night.
Bye.